All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are doing a deep dive into a book that's been making some serious waves in the fantasy world, The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I've got a whole pile of reviews here from professional critics and total fans of the genre, and we are going to help you figure out if you should add this to your to-read list or not.
So, looking at all these reviews, it seems like this book is one of those that people either love it or they hate it.
Ooh, that's interesting. So, what is it about this book that's got everybody talking?
Well, for one thing, Holly Black's writing style, some reviewers are just like totally gushing about her writing. They love how sharp and clear it is, and they talk about how she creates this world that you just feel like you're a part of.
Okay.
But then you have these other reviewers who are saying that her writing is kind of like repetitive and surface level.
Yeah.
They say she tells you what's happening instead of showing you.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a problem for some readers. I really enjoy a book that has those vivid descriptions, but I totally get it if a book tells too much and doesn't show enough. It can get boring.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you're someone who's like really into those beautifully written kind of lyrical books, or if you prefer a story that moves really fast, you might find Black's writing style a bit frustrating. But, on the other hand, if you're into that slower pace and you like how she builds the tension slowly, you'll probably get hooked.
Okay, so the writing style might not be for everyone. Got it. But what about the actual story? What makes The Cruel Prince different from all those other fairy books that are out there? We're talking about a genre that's totally packed with books.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But this is where things start to get really interesting. Black's version of fairies is like nothing you've seen before. Forget about those glittery, sweet little creatures you find in some books. These fairies are dark, dangerous, and, they're cruel. The inspiration for them comes more from those old folk tales with a bit of a Pan's Labyrinth vibe thrown in.
Okay, now we're talking. I'm so over those super romanticized fairy stories. Give me all the darkness and danger.
Oh, then you've come to the right place. One reviewer even said that Sarah J. Maas's fairies in A Court of Thorns and Roses seem almost tame compared to Black's.
All right, now you've got me really interested.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this darker take on fairies affect the story and the characters? Let's be real. In a fairy book, the fairies are like main characters, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
main character, Jude, who's a human girl who's raised in this High Court of Faerie, she's constantly trying to survive in this really messed up world. She's ambitious, she's tough, and she'll do whatever it takes to survive. And that's something that readers have really different opinions about. Some people think she's a fantastic, strong female character, while others find her kind of irritating or even just not likable.
See, that's the kind of character that I find interesting. Someone who's not perfect, not your typical goody two-shoes. I'd much rather read about a character who's got some flaws and is complex than one who's just perfect and predictable.
Oh, then you'll totally appreciate Jude. She is definitely not perfect. She makes some decisions that are questionable, for sure. And her ambition sometimes leads her down some pretty dark paths. And then there's this whole debate about her relationship with her adoptive fairy father, Madoc.
Oh, yeah, Madoc. He's the one who killed her parents, right?
Yeah.
But then he raised her as his own? That's got to create some serious issues.
It does. And Black really gets into that whole complicated situation. Some readers think that Jude is showing signs of Stockholm Syndrome, while others see their relationship as this kind of twisted thing that happens in a world where power and alliances are the only way to survive.
Yeah, I can see why that would be a controversial part of the book. It's definitely not a clear-cut situation, but I gotta say it makes me even more curious to see how their whole relationship plays out.
Oh, and then there's Cardan the Cruel Prince himself. He's a really interesting character. People have compared him to other, bad boy characters in young adult fiction,
Wow.
like Rythand from A Court of Thorns and Roses. He's got that dangerous charm and he can be really mean, but there's this vulnerability under the surface, too.
Okay, so I have to ask, is this another one of those love-hate relationships?
Yeah.
Because there are a ton of those in young adult fantasy. What makes Cardan and Jude's dynamic different?
It's all about the power struggle. They're constantly pushing each other's buttons, testing the limits. It's like this dangerous dance of manipulation and desire. It's not your typical bad boy falls for the strong girl kind of story.
Right. I'm not really into those predictable romances. So are you saying that their relationship is more about power than actual love?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Some readers see it as this toxic relationship that's built on an imbalance of power and a lot of manipulation. But other readers think that there's real affection there, even if it's kind of twisted and unhealthy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds like Black really likes to explore those gray areas in her writing, which honestly is what makes fairy stories so captivating. But I gotta admit, this whole slow burn thing makes me a little nervous. Some reviewers mentioned that the first part of the book is a bit slow, and the real action doesn't happen until later.
I don't know if I'm being honest, but if a book doesn't grab me right away, I tend to lose interest.
I get it.
Yeah.
That's a valid concern. And it seems like a lot of readers feel that way. But here's the thing about The Cruel Prince, that slow burn is intentional. Black uses those first few chapters to really carefully build the world of the story and develop her characters. It's like she's laying the foundation for this amazing, kind of twisted castle.
Mm.
And trust me, it's worth it in the end.
Okay, I'm willing to give it a try. But can you give me a little more detail? What kind of payoff are we talking about? Because some reviewers mentioned they were frustrated by the lack of action early on. Okay, so picture this. You've got all this political scheming going on in the High Court. Betrayals are happening left and right. And these dangerous alliances are forming between characters who are constantly changing sides. And then, of course, you have the constant threat of violence. Remember, these are not your friendly neighborhood fairies. Once the plot really gets moving, it's a wild ride.
All right, you've got me interested again.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the ending? We all know how important good ending is, especially in a trilogy. Is it satisfying, or is it one of those cliffhangers that leaves you feeling frustrated?
Well, let's just say it's not for those who like things tied up neatly. It's a cliffhanger that will definitely leave you wanting more. Some readers thought it was super exciting, while others felt a bit cheated.
Oh, a cliffhanger, huh? That could go either way for me. I guess it depends on how much I care about the characters and the story by the time I get to the end. So to help me decide, let's talk about how this book compares to other popular fantasy books, especially those with fairies. We've got A Court of Thorns and Roses, The Hunger Games, Vampire Academy, even Black's own book, The Darkest Part of the Forest, to consider.
Right, it's natural to compare them. Let's start with A Court of Thorns and Roses, since it's the most obvious comparison because of the fairy setting and the romance elements. But what makes The Cruel Prince different is its darker tone, the characters who are morally complex, and the focus on all the political maneuvering. It's less about a big romance and more about navigating this really dangerous court system where power is everything.
So less swooning and more scheming, I can get behind that. What about The Hunger Games? Some reviewers mentioned that there are some similarities in terms of rebellion and survival.
Yeah, there are definitely elements of that. But the focus in The Cruel Prince is less about bringing down a tyrannical government and more about learning how to play the game in this complicated court system. Jude's not trying to destroy the system, she's trying to climb to the top of it.
Interesting. So it's more about being clever and strategic than just brute force.
Mm.
What about Vampire Academy? I really love that series. Are there any similarities there?
Both books have strong female characters who are trying to survive in these hidden, dangerous worlds. And there's a similar feeling of competition and everyone wanting power. But The Cruel Prince is more focused on fantasy and political intrigue, while Vampire Academy has more of that paranormal romance feel.
Okay, last comparison. Black's own The Darkest Part of the Forest. How does The Cruel Prince compare to that one?
Well, both books explore similar ideas about how fairies and humans interact. But The Cruel Prince expands on that world. It creates this really intricate political landscape and really dives into the complexities of fairy society. It's a more mature and ambitious book.
Okay, now I'm starting to get a better understanding of where The Cruel Prince fits in the fantasy world. But let's be real here. For a lot of readers, the big question is it worth investing time in a whole trilogy, especially one with a cliffhanger ending? Give me the top reasons why someone should take the plunge.
What really grabbed me and what I think a lot of readers connect with is how The Cruel Prince explores ambition and belonging. Jude's constant pursuit of power comes from this deep need to be recognized, to find a place for herself in a world that keeps telling her she doesn't belong. It makes you think about the choices we make when things are tough, the temptation of power, and the sacrifices we're willing to make to be accepted.
Those are some pretty heavy themes for a young adult fantasy novel. But I guess that's what makes it more than just a simple fairy tale.
So we've talked about the writing, the characters, the comparisons, but before we get to our final recommendations, there's something that came up in a lot of the reviews that I want to talk about. The relationship between Jude and Cardan. It's obviously a big reason why a lot of readers love the book, but it's also really messy and maybe even problematic. Why do you think people are so drawn to this dynamic, even though it's kind of a red flag?
Well, part of it is definitely because Black is a really good writer. She creates characters that are flawed and interesting, even when they're making bad choices. We're drawn to their complexity, their weaknesses, and even their darkness. But it also says something about how powerful certain tropes are in fiction, especially in young adult fiction. The bad boy, who secretly has a good heart. The strong-willed heroine who challenges him. The forbidden romance that happens in the middle of danger and intrigue. These are all things that really resonate with readers. Yeah, I get that. There's something about those bad boys that's just appealing even when, they're trouble.
Yeah.
But is it just that Black is really good at using those tropes, or is there something more going on? Are we as readers maybe too quick to overlook those bad boy behaviors just because we want a good love story?
That's a really great question, and it goes beyond just this one book. It's a conversation about what society expects, how power works in relationships, and what we personally like as readers. But the important thing is that The Cruel Prince makes us have these. If you're looking for a light and fluffy fairy tale, this is not the book for you. But if you like stories that are darker and more complex with characters who aren't always good or bad, intricate political plots, and a romance that builds slowly, then The Cruel Prince is definitely worth reading.
Okay, you've convinced me. I'm adding it to my list. But before I jump into the world of Elfhame, give our listener one last thing to think about, something to keep in mind as they start reading.
As you're reading, pay attention to how power works in the magical world that Black has created and in the relationships between the characters. Ask yourself why you're rooting for certain characters, even when they're doing things that might be wrong. And don't be afraid of the complexity, because that's where the real magic is.
Okay, I'm definitely getting the sense that The Cruel Prince is more than just your average fairy tale. It's a story that makes you think, challenges what you believe, and maybe even keeps you up at night thinking about those moral dilemmas.
Exactly. It really stays with you, and that's what makes it so captivating.
So we've covered a lot here. The writing style, those characters who are kind of morally ambiguous, the whole complex world of fairy politics and how it
Yeah.
compares to other popular books. But at the end of the day, our listener wants to know, is this book worth their time?
Well, like we said at the beginning, The Cruel Prince is a book that people have strong opinions about. And that's partly because it's not easy to put into a box. It's got fantasy romance, political intrigue, and even a bit of psychological thriller all mixed together.
Like a genre mashup.
Exactly. And that could be its best feature or its biggest flaw. It really depends on what you're looking for in a book.
Okay, so let's break it down. Who should definitely read this book?
If you like stories that turn traditional tropes upside down, if you're fascinated by characters who aren't perfect and make decisions you might not agree with, and if you're okay with a plot that takes its time to build but gives you a really immersive experience in the end, then The Cruel Prince is for you.
Okay. And what about the readers who might want to skip this one? Be honest.
If you prefer your fairies to be more on the whimsical side, your romances to be more straightforward, and your plots to be action-packed right from the start, then you might find this book frustrating. It's a slow burn, remember? And it explores some pretty dark themes.
Fair enough. So for our listener who's still not sure, let's give them one last thing to think about, something to really consider while they're making up their mind.
The Cruel Prince makes us look at our own expectations and biases. It asks us to look deeper and think about why characters make the choices they do, especially in a world where survival often means compromising your morals. It's a story that challenges us to think critically about power, ambition, and what it truly means to belong. And those are questions worth thinking about whether you decide to read the book or not.
Well said. And with that, I think we've covered The Cruel Prince pretty thoroughly.
Yes, it's been a really interesting deep dive.
We've explored the darker side of the fairy world, analyzed those complex characters, and hopefully given our listener everything they need to decide if this book is for them. So listener, the choice is yours. Will you step into the dangerous world of Elfhame? Only you can decide. But no matter what you choose, keep reading, keep exploring, and keep those deep dives going. Until next time.
Yeah, I think you're right. It definitely sounds like this book makes you think. And maybe even question some of your own ideas.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those stories that sticks with you.
So we've talked about a lot. The writing style, the characters, and how morally gray they are, that whole world of fairy politics, and how this book compares to others. But I think our listeners are probably wondering, is it really worth reading?
Well, we did say at the beginning that people have strong opinions about The Cruel Prince,
Yeah.
right? And I think part of that is because it's hard to put it in a specific category. It's got fantasy, romance, political intrigue. It even has some elements of a psychological thriller.
It's like a mix of everything. Yeah, exactly. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing. It all depends on what a reader is looking for.
So let's make it simple. For whom is this a must-read?
If you like stories that turn things upside down, like, stories that don't follow the usual formulas. And if you're into characters who are flawed, who make choices you might not agree with, and if you're the kind of reader who's willing to be patient with a story that unfolds slowly but then gives you a really immersive experience, then The Cruel Prince is for you.
Okay. And what about the readers who might want to pass on this one? What would you say to them?
If you're someone who likes their fairies to be more of the cute and whimsical kind,
Yeah.
and if you prefer romances that are more straightforward, and if you need a plot that's full of action from the very beginning, well, then you might not enjoy this book. It's a slow burn, and it goes into some pretty dark themes.
That makes sense. So for our listener who's still on the fence, what's one final takeaway? Something to really consider before making a decision.
I think The Cruel Prince makes us confront our own expectations and our own biases. It asks us to think about why characters make the choices they do, especially in a world where survival often means doing things that aren't morally right. It makes us think about power ambition and what it means to truly belong. These are all important questions to think about whether you choose to read the book or not.
I agree with that. And on that note, I think we've done a pretty thorough deep dive into The Cruel Prince.
Yeah, it's been an interesting discussion.
We've gone deep into the darker side of the fairy world. We've taken a close look at the characters and their complexities. And hopefully we've given our listener everything they need to decide if this book is for them. So listener, the choice is yours. Will you enter the world of Elfhame? It's up to you. But no matter what you decide, keep reading, keep exploring, and keep those deep dives going. Until next time.